Welcome. My name is Arwen Hubbard, and I am an educator specializing in space science. I'm a podcaster and a NASA Solar System ambassador. So, before we get into the idea of learner driven questions, let's back up for a moment and think about the role of an educator. So, in the past, the educator was the keeper of knowledge, right? But we live in a world saturated with information. And so, if something is well understood, then most students can find that information without somebody there to help them. So, what is it that the educator is doing then? Well, as educators, we are providing a connection for these students. We're helping them to make the connections between different ideas, not just here's the information, but how does this information fit and connect with other pieces of information? We're creating environments that really facilitate and empower their learning. So, if we want to bring in some of the education buzzwords here, we are trying to create positive, empowering learning environments. We're really focusing on the self efficacy of students, their belief in themselves and their ability. And today, what we're talking mostly about is their confidence in their curiosity and being able to follow their questions as a way to learn and engage in that material. And so we want to create learning environments in which not only do students have permission to be curious, but that is encouraged. That is something that we really want. We want to model that for them because that helps them learn, but also because that's how science works, right? Science is about asking questions and figuring out how to answer those questions. And as soon as those questions are answered, it opens up how many new questions, right? So, learner driven questions, this is a way to get the learner, the student, invested in the material. Now, hopefully, we're talking about astronomy here. This is a topic which is often a passion topic for learners. You usually don't have people in your astronomy course or coming to your lectures if you're doing outreach for your university or whatever it is. You usually don't have people coming who aren't already interested in space, like you might have in some of the other topics that students are required to take in school. So you already have a little bit of buy in here. But by focusing on what it is that they are interested in or what it is that they are thinking about, well, we're going to be able to do a better job helping them to really become engaged. So, what are our goals here? Well, obviously, we want to answer the question, or we want to help them to answer the question. That may be the situation sometimes, right? So, we want to share the knowledge, but we want to do it in a way that asking questions that is a good thing. We really want to grow and foster curiosity. And that goes back to creating a learning environment in which, well, learning can be done. Because when they are curious, when they're able to ask questions, they're going to learn the material better. They're going to be more invested in it. And of course, that's the ideal of a good scientist. So, for me, I teach in a lot of different contexts, and I use this approach of trying to focus on the learner's question in many different situations. One of the places where it really shines is in my podcast. So, my podcast is Found in Space, a science podcast for kids and teens, and it reaches students, learners, and their families around the world outside of a traditional educational context. But let me talk about the process. So these are very short episodes. The listeners have their parents write in a question that they have. And I have a strategy that I use each time. And this is really easy to apply to other situations. We're going to get into that in a moment, other contexts that you can use. So the first thing is to acknowledge the questioner, the learner. And that sometimes you might have their name, or sometimes it might be something as simple as Great. Then you want to highlight the question, right? You are reinforcing that asking questions is good. This is something that you want to do. They're being emotionally rewarded for being curious, for trying to put these ideas together. Then I launch into the explanation of whatever it is. Then invite more questions. And this is really important, is to invite. So you've praised the fact that they asked questions. You're going to invite them to ask questions again. And you're not just inviting them, you're inviting all of the other people who are listening or who are engaging with you. Now, I'm guessing that most of you are going to be in other contexts. Some of you may be doing some sort of teaching or outreach on social media and online. In that case, the format that I talked about with the podcast works great, right? You can translate that pretty much one to one. But some of you are going to be giving public lectures. And you may not be dealing with young children, you might be dealing with graduate students or something like that, right? So you may be a little bit more restricted in how you are presenting because you have a specific agenda or a specific curriculum that you have to be teaching to or presenting to, right? So in this case, you might have to be a little bit more creative in thinking about, okay, how do I invite them to ask questions? Sometimes you may not have the back and forth with the actual student. So it may just be inviting them to ask those questions and hoping that they're kind of thinking about that in their head. But hopefully you'll have some interaction, some back and forth. So you can do things like start with some questions at the beginning. And you may pose some questions as if you were the student. And again, that's going to just invite them to be asking those questions. You might stop in the middle of the lecture, invite questions, get questions from the audience. Again, you might have to start with the first question to get them kind of going, and then direct the second half of your presentation around what they are interested in. Now, in a classroom setting, there's a lot of potential here. And again, that's going to depend on your age group, your subject, what requirements you have, right? But one of the techniques that I really love is question time. So you can have the students write their questions and hand them into you if you think you've got kind of a shy bunch, um, or you can have it out loud and use those steps that we talked about before. Right? Let's jump back to that about acknowledging the learner, highlighting the question. Although the learner might want to be anonymous, you still don't need to say their name, but acknowledge that the questioner did a good job by asking that. And you can use that as something for them to think about between classes. You can have them ask questions at the end of class, and you can come back with the answer and presentation in the next class, things like that. Now, here is what I think is really the most interesting part. This is where we're going to have some incredible opportunity. There will be times where you have some challenging questions. And the first one, love this one. Sometimes you will not know the answer to the question. And of course, as members of the scientific community, we know that's not a bad thing. That is actually an opportunity. And so we've got the opportunity to model, to demonstrate how much of a gift this is when we do come across questions. So I invite you to think about, okay, how are you going to respond to that? And don't pretend that you do know the answer, right? Because nobody knows all the answers. This is a time to say, I don't know. But, and whatever that but is going to depend on the question, right? So is it a question that the knowledge is out there, it's just not your field, or you don't have that number memorized? You say, I don't know, but let's find out. And you find out together, or you talk about how you'd find out. Now, it may also be a question that nobody knows the answer to. This is something like, what was before the Big Bang? Is there life in the European oceans around Jupiter? Questions like that. So in that circumstance, you have the opportunity to go, okay, I don't know, but how would we find out? And you can ask them questions back, right? So then you've got this back and forth of questions and answering together, and you can really start to explore together, not just this, handing down the knowledge. And you always have the opportunity to tie it back into whatever you're talking about. Now, the second thing that you're going to run into is that sometimes students have questions that have misconceptions in them, where they do need to be corrected about something that they've got wrong, right? So, an example might be if they say, why is Mars so hot? Okay, well, Mars isn't hot, right? We know Mars is actually quite cold. But if you just say that Mars is cold, not hot, well, that doesn't really help with their sense of themselves, right? There are some rare people out there who are not going to be fazed by just being told that they're wrong right off the bat. Instead, what you can do is try to, again, you want to honor the fact that they asked that question and think about why would that be the assumption? Well, this is actually really interesting. We associate red with hot, right? With fire, or when you're heating up metal, it gets red hot. Ah, but, well, what does color tell us? Sometimes color tells us about temperature, but what else could color tell us, right? So get into that. And then, of course, you come back around to, yeah, Mars is cold. Well, why is it? But it isn't in a way that is shooting them down. It's in a way that is lifting them up. The more that we can encourage that curiosity, the more that we can honor that they are asking questions and interested in engaging and act as a guide for them, well, the more that they can learn and, well, also the more that we can learn too, right? Okay. So thank you so much, everybody. I invite you to try some of this out with your own students, with the learners that you'll be engaging with in the future. And thank you so much.